In 1969, if you wanted a motorcycle in America, you bought American. Harley-Davidson or Indian. Those were your options, and nobody complained because our bikes were the best in the world. Harley-Davidson's factory in Milwaukee employed over 4,000 workers building motorcycles that cops rode, soldiers rode, rebels rode, Steve McQueen rode one, Marlon Brando made one iconic in a single movie. When you saw a motorcycle, you saw America. Indian Motorcycle in Springfield, Massachusetts had been building bikes since 1901. Nearly 70 years of American engineering, American craftsmanship, American pride. These weren't just companies, they were institutions. They were part of the national identity. By 1983, Indian was dead. Harley-Davidson was weeks away from bankruptcy. And Japanese manufacturers owned over 90% of the American motorcycle market. 90%. So how did we lose it all? The answer isn't complicated, but it's painful. And there is one decision made in one corporate boardroom in 1969 that destroyed the American motorcycle industry forever. Let me show you what happened. Walk into the Harley-Davidson factory in Milwaukee in 1965, and you would feel it immediately. The sound of engines being assembled by hand, the smell of hot metal and fresh paint, the rhythm of men who'd been doing this work for decades, some of them second and third generation Harley workers, fathers teaching sons, grandfathers who'd built bikes for World War II, soldiers watching their grandsons build bikes for a new generation. This wasn't just a job, this was identity. A man could walk into a bar in Milwaukee and say, "I work at Harley," and everyone in that room knew exactly what that meant. Skill, pride, security. A Harley-Davidson paycheck meant you could buy a house, raise a family, send your kids to college, and retire with a pension. That was the deal. You gave them your labor, your expertise, your loyalty, and they gave you a life. And for decades, that deal held. The bikes they built were legendary: the Panhead, the Shovelhead, the Sportster. These were machines built to last. Heavy steel frames, simple air-cooled engines, mechanical components you could fix with basic tools in your garage. If something broke, you didn't need a dealer with a $10,000 diagnostic computer. You needed a wrench and some mechanical knowledge, and every American rider had both. Indian Motorcycle was the same story, just 90 miles east. Springfield, Massachusetts had built its identity around Indian. The factory employed thousands. The bikes they built won races, set speed records, and became the choice of police departments across the country. An Indian Scout was as American as baseball. When soldiers came home from World War II, they bought Indians and Harleys because those were the bikes that represented freedom, power, and the America they'd fought to protect. And here's what made it perfect. These companies didn't just employ people, they built communities. The factory workers bowled together in company leagues. Their kids played on the same softball teams. Union halls hosted wedding receptions and retirement parties. Main Street in Milwaukee and Springfield existed because factory paychecks flowed through those towns every Friday. The barber, the grocer, the car dealer, the diner owner, everyone depended on those motorcycle factories, and those factories delivered decade after decade. The American motorcycle industry in the 1950s and 60s was unbreakable, or so we thought. But underneath all that strength, something was starting to go wrong. And it began with the men running these companies. In the 1940s and 50s, the executives at Harley-Davidson had often worked their way up from the factory floor. They understood production because they had lived it. They knew what a good weld looked like. They knew the sound a properly tuned engine made. They respected the workers because they had been workers. But by the late 1960s, a new kind of manager started taking over. Business school graduates, finance men, people who understood spreadsheets better than assembly lines. They looked at motorcycles and saw units to move, not machines to perfect. They looked at production schedules and saw costs to cut, not craftsmanship to protect. This shift was quiet, but it was devastating. Decisions that used to be made by people who understood motorcycles were now being made by people who understood profit margins. And those are two very different things. When an old school Harley manager looked at a quality problem, he walked onto the factory floor and asked the workers what was wrong. When a finance executive looked at the same problem, he asked how much it would cost to fix and whether they could ignore it for one more quarter. That difference right there, that's where the decline began. The workers saw it immediately. They could feel it in the parts they were being handed. Cheaper bolts that stripped easier. Gaskets that weren't quite thick enough. Assembly schedules that didn't leave time to properly torque every fastener. They tried to speak up, but the new managers didn't want to hear it. They had quarterly earnings to hit, and quality took time, and time cost money. Meanwhile, something else was happening that American executives completely missed. Japan was about to eat our lunch. After World War II, we helped Japan rebuild. We gave them access to our manufacturing knowledge, our technology, our methods. And they didn't just copy what we did. They studied it, improved it, and then beat us with it. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki. These companies weren't just building motorcycles, they were building better motorcycles. Lighter, faster, more reliable, and cheaper. But here's what really killed us. It wasn't just the bikes, it was the philosophy. Japanese manufacturers treated their workers as assets, not expenses. At Honda, every single worker on the assembly line had the authority to stop production if they spotted a defect. Every worker. If you saw a problem, you pulled the cord, the line stopped, and management came to you and asked what was wrong. You were thanked for catching the issue before it became a customer's problem. At Harley-Davidson, if you stopped the line, you got yelled at. You got written up. You were told to keep the line moving and let quality control handle it later. Except, quality control was understaffed, overworked, and under pressure to pass bikes through even when they knew there were problems. Japanese companies also invested in their workers. Training programs, apprenticeships, continuous education on new techniques and technologies. They treated manufacturing as a skilled profession that required constant learning and improvement. American companies treated factory workers as interchangeable parts. If you complained, if you asked questions, if you demanded better quality, there were 10 guys outside the gate who'd take your job and keep their mouths shut. The Japanese bikes started showing up in American dealerships in the early 1960s. Small displacement bikes at first, Honda Cubs, Yamaha 125s. American riders laughed at them. Toys, cute little things for kids and housewives. Real men rode Harleys. But by the late 60s, the Japanese weren't building small bikes anymore. They were building middleweights and big bikes that could compete directly with American iron. And here's what broke American hearts. They were better. Out of 1969, Honda CB750 had an inline 4-cylinder engine, electric start, a disc brake, and it didn't leak oil. It started every time you pressed the button. It didn't vibrate your fillings loose at highway speed. It didn't require constant adjustment and maintenance. And it cost less than a Harley. A lot less. American riders started doing the math. Why pay more for a bike that requires more work when you could pay less for a bike that just works? And then came the decision that changed everything. In 1969, Harley-Davidson was sold to AMF, American Machine and Foundry Corporation. MF was a conglomerate that made bowling equipment, golf balls, and recreational products. They saw Harley-Davidson as an acquisition, a brand they could leverage, a profit center they could squeeze. The Harley-Davidson family and the loyal executives who understood motorcycles lost control. AMF installed their own management team. Finance guys, operations specialists who'd optimize bowling pin factories and golf club production lines. They looked at the Harley factory and saw inefficiency everywhere. Too much time spent on hand-fitting parts, too many quality checks, too much worker input. All of that was waste in their eyes, waste that could be eliminated to boost profit margins. So they did exactly that. They increased production quotas without increasing workforce. They cut quality control staff. They sourced cheaper components from lower-cost suppliers. They pushed assembly line speeds faster and faster. The message was clear: build more bikes, spend less money doing it, and hit the quarterly numbers. The workers on the factory floor knew immediately that this was a disaster. They could see the quality collapsing in real time. Engines that used to be hand-assembled by skilled machinists were now being rushed together by workers who didn't have time to check their work. Frames that used to be carefully inspected for flaws were being sent down the line with stress cracks that would fail in a few thousand miles. Electrical systems that used to be hand-wired with care were now being hastily thrown together with connectors that would corrode and fail. And the bikes that rolled off that line showed it. Harley started leaking oil from every gasket. Transmissions were failing at 15,000 miles. Electrical systems were shorting out. Fasteners were backing out because nobody had time to properly torque them. Riders who'd been loyal to Harley for decades started having bikes that spent more time in the shop than on the road. This wasn't the workers' fault. The same men who'd built bulletproof Harleys in 1965 were still there in 1975. They hadn't forgotten how to build motorcycles. But they were being given garbage components, impossible schedules, and zero support from management. When they tried to speak up, when they tried to stop the line and say, "This isn't right, we're building junk," they were ignored or punished. That's what broke the spirit of American motorcycle workers. Not laziness, not lack of skill. It was watching the bikes you built with your own hands get worse and worse every single year because the people in charge cared more about quarterly earnings reports than the reputation you'd spent your entire career building. By the mid-1970s, Harley-Davidson's reputation was in freefall. Riders started calling them Harley Abelson or Hardly Drivable. The joke was that you needed to follow a Harley with a pickup truck to haul it home when it inevitably broke down. This was devastating because just 10 years earlier, Harley-Davidson had been a point of American pride. Now it was a punchline. And while Harley was collapsing under AMF's mismanagement, Indian Motorcycle was dying its own slow death. Indian had been bought and sold multiple times, each new owner promising to revive the brand and then proceeding to strip it for parts. By 1953, Indian stopped manufacturing motorcycles entirely. The brand that had built bikes since 1901, that had won races, set records, and defined American motorcycling, was gone. There were attempts to revive Indian over the decades. Different companies bought the name, slapped it on imported bikes or cheaply made replicas, and tried to cash in on the nostalgia. But the soul of Indian, the Springfield factory, the generational knowledge, the craftsmanship, all of that was gone forever. You don't just rebuild that with a trademark and some marketing. Harley limped through the 70s, bleeding market share every single year. In 1973, Harley had about 75% of the American heavyweight motorcycle market. By 1980, they had less than 15%. Japanese bikes owned the market. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki were selling reliable, powerful, affordable motorcycles while Harley sat on the dealer lots with for sale signs gathering dust. Here's what proves the workers were never the problem. In 1981, a group of Harley executives led by Vaughn Beals bought the company back from AMF in a leveraged buyout. They were drowning in debt, weeks from bankruptcy, but they had something AMF never had. They understood motorcycles and they respected the workers who built them. The new management went to the factory floor and did something revolutionary. They asked the workers what was wrong and actually listened to the answers. The workers told them everything. The cheap components that were failing, the impossible production schedules, the lack of quality control, the corner cutting that was destroying the brand. And management fixed it. They slowed production down. They brought back quality checks. They worked with suppliers to get better components. They gave workers the authority to stop the line if they saw problems. They brought back the pride. And you know what happened? The same workers who had been building unreliable junk under AMF started building great motorcycles again. Same people, same factory, different priorities. Within a few years, Harley quality came roaring back. The Evolution engine, released in 1984, was a triumph. Reliable, powerful, oil-tight. Everything a Harley should be. By the 1990s, Harley-Davidson was not just surviving, it was thriving. But the damage was done. They never got back to 75% market share. Japanese manufacturers had built their own loyal customer bases. Riders who had switched to Honda or Yamaha in the 70s weren't coming back. An entire generation of riders had grown up thinking Harleys were junk. And the factory? It never came all the way back either. Harley-Davidson employed over 4,000 workers in Milwaukee in 1969. Today, they employ a fraction of that. Much of Harley's manufacturing has moved overseas. Bikes sold in international markets are built in Thailand, in India, in Brazil. The Milwaukee factory still exists, but it's a shadow of what it was. What we lost was more than market share. We lost something that's hard to put into words. American motorcycles represented something. Freedom. Rebellion. Power. Individualism. When Marlon Brando rode that Triumph in The Wild One, when Steve McQueen jumped that fence in The Great Escape, those weren't just movies. Those were cultural moments that defined what motorcycles meant to America. And it wasn't just about the bikes, it was about the work. A man could walk into a factory in Milwaukee and spend 30 years building motorcycles with his hands. He could retire and know that he had built thousands of machines that riders loved. There was dignity in that. Purpose. You weren't just assembling products, you were creating something that people connected with emotionally. The factory was also the center of community, company picnics where families would gather, union halls where workers organized and fought for fair wages and safe conditions, bowling leagues and softball teams where factory workers and their kids built lifelong friendships. When the factories downsized, when production moved overseas, all of that disappeared. The younger generation never got a chance to experience it. If you're under 40, you probably don't remember an America where motorcycles meant American motorcycles. You grew up in a world where a Harley was a niche brand for older riders reliving their youth, and real motorcycles, the ones people actually rode and depended on, were made in Japan. Here's what makes this story so painful. It didn't have to happen. The Japanese didn't beat us because they were smarter or more talented. They beat us because they made better decisions. They invested in their workers. They treated quality as a priority, not a cost. They built for the long term instead of the next quarter. We had every advantage. We had the brand loyalty. We had the manufacturing knowledge. We had skilled workers who'd been building motorcycles for generations. We had the cultural cachet. We had everything. And we threw it all away because a group of executives in a boardroom in 1969 decided that short-term profit mattered more than long-term excellence. Because AMF looked at Harley-Davidson and saw a brand to exploit rather than a legacy to protect. Because finance men who'd never turned a wrench in their lives thought they knew better than the workers who'd spent their entire lives building motorcycles. Germany kept its manufacturing. Japan built on theirs. South Korea created new industries from nothing. They all understood that a country that makes things has power, stability, and good jobs. A country that stops making things eventually loses the knowledge of how to make things. And once that knowledge is gone, once those skills disappear, once those communities die, you don't rebuild them with a press release and a tax credit. Today, Harley-Davidson survives, but it's a different company. The average Harley buyer is in their 50s. Sales to younger riders have collapsed. The brand that once represented rebellion and freedom now represents nostalgia and midlife crisis. That's not Harley's fault. That's what happens when you lose an entire generation of riders because your bikes didn't work for 20 years. Indian Motorcycle was eventually revived by Polaris Industries in 2011. They're building beautiful bikes now, reliable, well-engineered, successful in the marketplace. But it's not the same. The Springfield factory is gone. The generational knowledge is gone. The workers who built Indians from 1901 to 1953, their expertise died with them. What we have now is a trademark and some modern manufacturing. That's valuable, but it's not the same as what was lost. And the workers? The men who built Harleys in Milwaukee, who built Indians in Springfield, most of them are gone now. The ones who are still alive are in their 70s and 80s. They watch their industry collapse. They watch their skills become obsolete. They watch their communities fall apart. And here's the cruelest part. It wasn't their fault. They did everything right. They showed up. They worked hard. They built the best motorcycles they were allowed to build with the resources they were given. The failure was above them. It was in boardrooms. It was in management decisions. It was in a corporate culture that prioritized quarterly profits over generational excellence.